Ever since we started hearing about the labor shortage situation here in the US, there's been so much blame to go around. Some people like to blame lazy millennials, other people like to blame the Joe Biden administration, other people like to blame poor people who are just unwilling to go get a job. And, there's been this idea that because of the boosted unemployment benefits, that meant that many people were just unwilling to get a job. They wanted to just stay home and live off of government resources. The same was said about the stimulus checks, with the idea that, okay, well, if you get $1,000 here and there, you don't really need to work, which is kind of silly, really, because obviously $1,000 or $1,200, $1,400, that's not going to be enough to cover your long-term basic needs. And indeed, the labor shortage does persist. The number of job openings was at an all-time high as of October at more than 11 million openings, and companies are struggling still to hire enough workers to meet the demand. But the truth is that the labor shortage is caused by a multitude of factors, and chief among them have to do with baby boomers retiring early and a reduction in worker visas that have been granted over the course of the pandemic. Overall, I was able to come up with 8 reasons in total for the labor shortage situation, so I wanted to run through them all with you here. So number 1, and these are in no particular order, people are retiring early. Estimates suggest that the U.S. has about 2 million more retirees right now than we otherwise would have expected if we had not had the pandemic. And this makes sense because let's say you were 62 years old when the pandemic started and you planned on retiring at age 65. Well, by now you're about 63 and a half, going on 64. Do you really want to go back to work for another year or so, especially when you already are semi-retired as it is? Probably not, especially given the fact that the stock market has boomed over the past couple of years, so people's retirement accounts are higher than they expected them to be. Also, real estate values have gone up significantly, so people, assuming they own their house and assuming they have a 401k or an IRA, they've seen a sizable growth in their wealth over the past couple of years, making it so they may not have to keep working. They might as well just retire early. Number 2 has to do with immigration. The U.S. government has issued about 1.2 million fewer visas to adult immigrants, refugees, and temporary foreign workers. And I think this is intuitive given that restrictions on travel were in existence, especially during the early phase of the pandemic. Many of these restrictions still exist today. There's a chance also that things can turn around because now the Department of Homeland Security has announced that the Biden administration is going to be adding 20,000 new slots to a seasonal guest worker program for the winter season. But it makes sense that given there's a pandemic raging throughout the world, people just don't want to be traveling from country to country. Number 3, there's a skills mismatch. 48% of workers said that they were frustrated with the search, and 46% said that they can only find low-paying roles. Just because a job is available, that doesn't mean that people necessarily want to take that job. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's a good paying job. And we know that some people were able to take advantage of their time off during the pandemic, and many people learned new skills. They did online classes, etc. And so their market value has improved. But if they don't find a job that matches their skill improvement, maybe they're just going to decide to hold out. Number 4, commuting. People many times just don't want to go back to commuting. Obviously, during the beginning phase of the pandemic, many workers moved out of the areas that would be hiring by now, like they moved from cities to rural areas, and they just have decided they don't want to commute anymore. That's been my experience. Like, I like working from home. It wouldn't be a total deal breaker for me if I had to start going back into an office every day, but I'd prefer to just keep working from home. Obviously, commuting can be very, very stressful, especially if you have a long commute. Like if you're driving an hour to and from work every day, I mean, that's just crazy. And if you don't have to do it anymore, why would you want to? So commuting obviously is a big factor. Number 5, childcare. Most schools are open at this point, but there can be cancellations based on COVID cases at the drop of a hat. Maybe the school year gets halted early. Obviously, we're seeing some closures now with Omicron. So sometimes parents who may be working part-time while the kids are at school, they can't do that anymore because they have to be home to take care of the child, or at least they have to keep that as an option in case school does get shut down. Number 6 is protests over vaccine mandates. There are some people who are just not going to get the vaccine no matter what. It doesn't matter if you offer them a carrot or a stick. And so obviously, if they refuse to get the vaccine, there are so many jobs that they're no longer eligible for. They can't work for a government agency, or they can't be a government contractor. They can't work for a company with more than 50 employees. They can't work in certain cities in the country. So obviously that lowers their possibilities when it comes to the job market, and that's also contributing in part to the labor shortage. Number 7, fear of the virus. Cases are obviously surging surging out of control right now. The Omicron variant is super contagious, and so there are people who are maybe older or immunosuppressed, and they feel as though, I want to get a job, but I don't want to put my life at risk by doing so. And number 8, the Great Resignation. This is a term coined by organizational psychologist Anthony Klotz, who theorizes that people, especially pre-pandemic, they would tie in their identity with their work. And now, with people taking some time off and really being confronted with their mortality because the amount of people who have died over the past couple of years, it's caused a shift in their perspective, and they no longer wrap up their identity with what they do as a job. And I think that, maybe the Great Resignation talking point is a little bit overblown because, after all, people need to work to survive. Most people do anyway. But there could be some people who decide, I'm not going to work 40 to 50 hours a week anymore. I'm going to work part-time, or maybe I'll take a few more years off and resume working later. Maybe I want to decide that I'm going to do something else with my life. So it's definitely a mix of factors. Some of these things you're going to be able to improve over time. Other things you may not be able to, like, for example, the baby boomers retiring early. Are you really going to be able to bring them back into the job market? Probably not. They're probably retired and not going to be entering the job force again, at least not in mass. But then there's other factors that will improve as the state of coronavirus in this country improves, as we finally see cases go down, we finally start to see deaths go down. Whenever that may be, the economy will follow. We've been saying this for 2 years now, that you have to deal with the virus before you can deal with the economy, and we'll hope that this all sort of sorts itself out. But that's the sort of update now, having to do with the labor shortage and many of the reasons why it's happening.